Yes. Hare Krishna. Mataji, can you hear on Zoom?
I can hear online, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay, we'll start with prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naran Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraet Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 7, Text 11. Balam Balavatam Cha Aham Balam Balavatam Chaham
Balam balavatam chaham
Kama
raga
Vivarjitam
vivarjitam
Kama Raga Vivarjitam Dharma Viruddha Bhuteshu Dharma Viruddha Bhuteshu Kamaha Asmi Bharatarshava Kamo Asmi Bharatarshava Balam Balavatam Chaham Kama Raga Vivarjitam Dharma Viruddha Bhuteshu Kamo Asmi Bharatarshava Balam Balavatam Chaham Kama Raga Vivarjitam Dharma Viruddha Bhuteshu Kamo Asmi Bharatarshava Balam Balavatam Chaham Kama Raga Vivarjitam Dharma Viruddha Bhuteshu Kamo Asmi Bharatarshava
Balam balavatam chaham
Kama Raga Vivarjitam
dharma viruddha bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava
Balam balvatam chaham Kamaraga vivarjitam Dharma viruddha bhuteshu Kamo asmi bharatarshava
Balam balavatam chaham Kamaraga vivarjitam Dharma viruddha bhuteshu Kamosmi bharatarshava
Balam balavatam chaham Kamaraga vivarjitam Dharma viruddho bhuteshu Kamosmi bharatarshava
बलं बलवतां चाहं
बलं बलवतां चाहं
कामरागाविवर्जितं
कामरागाविवर्जितं
धर्माविरुद्धो भूतेषु
धर्माविरुद्धो भूतेषु
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ
बलां बलवतं चाहं
बलं बलवतां चाहं
कामरागाविवर्जितं
कामरागाविवर्जितं
धर्माविरुद्धो भूतेषु
धर्माविरुद्धो भूतेषु
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभा
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ
बलं बलवतां चाहं
बलं बलवतां चाहं
कामरागविवर्जितं
कामरागाविवर्जितं
धर्मविरुद्धो भूतेषु
धर्माविरुद्धो भूतेषु
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ
बलं बलवतां चाहं
बलं बलवतां चाहं
कामरागविवर्जितं
कामरागाविवर्जितं
धर्माविरुद्धभूतेषु
धर्माविरुद्धभूतेषु
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ
कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ ऑनलाइन बलं बलवतां चाहं कामरागाविवर्जितं धर्माविरुद्धो भूतेषु कामोऽस्मि भरतर्षभ What word meaning? Balam, strength. Balavatam, of the strong. Cha,
cha
and.
and
Aham, I am.
I am.
Kama,
Kama,
passion.
passion.
Raga,
Raga,
attachment.
an attachment.
Vivarjitam,
Vivarjitam,
devoid of.
devoid of.
Dharma aviruddha,
Dharma aviruddha,
not against the religious principles.
not against religious principles.
Bhuteshu,
Bhuteshu,
in all beings.
in all beings.
Kamaha,
Kamaha,
sex life.
sex life.
Asmi,
Asmi,
I am.
I am.
Bharatarshabha,
Bharatarishabha,
O Lord of the Bharatas.
O Lord of the Bharatas.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Translation. And the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire. I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles. O Lord of the Bharatas, Arjuna. Translation with repetition. I am the strength of the strong,
I am the strength of the strong,
devoid of passion
devoid of passion
and desire.
and desire.
I am sex life,
I am sex life,
which is not contrary to
which is not contrary to
religious principles.
religious principles.
O Lord of the Bharatas,
O Lord of the Bharatas,
Arjuna.
Arjuna.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada.
Srila Prabhupada.
The strong man's strength should be applied to protect the weak, not for personal aggression. Similarly, sex life, according to religious principles, dharma, should be for the propagation of children, not otherwise. The responsibility of parents is then to make their offspring Krishna conscious. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhakti Vedanta purport. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are in the 7th chapter, 11th verse today, discussing some important principles and nature of Krishna consciousness. As in the beginning, Prabhupada mentioned that this chapter talks about the nature of Krishna consciousness. And here again, it is very interesting to note how various aspects of our basic necessities of life and how they are also connected in Krishna consciousness and how one can perceive that. Jagannath Prabhu, can you go to audio settings and just see if Pro FX is okay. So these are very interesting verses. In fact, starting from the verse 4, where we are looking at Bhumi Rapo Analo Vayu Kham Mano Buddhi Revacha Ahankara Ityam Me Bhinna Prakriti Rashrita. So where the Lord is saying how these all the material energies are nothing but the separated energies of the Supreme Lord. And then the discussion about the living entity, how it is a superior energy of the Lord. And then there is description of the Lord himself as how he is the origin of both the material and the spiritual energies. And then we also saw how there is no other truth beyond the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. And then from verse number 8, there is description about how we could also perceive the Lord when we look at various aspects of this material creation, like the taste in the water. I am the taste of water, Lord says, the light of the sun and the moon, the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras, and I am the sound in ether and ability in man. So we have been seeing like this the various aspects which the Lord is describing in these verses. And yesterday also we saw a beautiful verse where Lord is saying, I am the original seed of all existence, the intelligence of the intelligent, and the prowess of all powerful men. So Lord is providing us with different indications and how to see the Lord and how do we become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada says these all verses are meant to help us to become Krishna conscious 24 hours. And Prabhupada says that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us a process of Trinarapi Sunichena Terorapi Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari. So the process to become Krishna conscious, one is to just continuously chant. And similarly, this knowledge about the Supreme Lord is also meant to help us become 24-hour Krishna conscious. And today's verse is another such fundamental important verse, which is again very important for us because this is again talking about some very important fundamental principles of life. So the first thing that is being said here is that Balam Balavatam Chaham. So Lord is mentioning here that I am the strength of the strong. So every living entity has some strength, some things to move. And that strength is nothing but the Lord himself. And then it is also being said here, Dharma viruddhuk bhuteshu kamo asmi bharatarshava. So here, Prabhupada translate kamaha as sex life. And here, in the translation, Prabhupada says, I am sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles. So, not contrary to religious principles is dharma aviruddho. So, aviruddha. So, this is another very important aspect of life, living, where this is one of the basic necessities of living entities, that is mating or sex life. And how can we see even the idea of sex life from a Krishna conscious perspective? So, because this is such an fundamental necessity of life, it is important that one also understands the Krishna conscious way of looking at this. And Prabhupada gives a very small purport, but in his lectures, Prabhupada elaborates on this idea of dharma viruddho bhuteshu kamo asmi bharatashaba. So we'll try to pay a little attention on this aspect. And so before we go into this understanding of what is dharma viruddho kamo asmi, one important point to note is that every living entity has some basic necessities of life. And as it is said, ahara nidra bhaya maitunam cha. So ahara, eating, ahara nidra, sleeping, maitunam, mating, and ahara nidra bhaya maitunam, ahara nidra bhaya maitunam. So bhaya is defending, so, or fear. So all living entities, animals, humans, they are all have these basic necessities. Now, what is that distinguishes an animal from human being is that how is one is engaging with these necessities of life. On one hand, the animals unrestrictedly engage in these 4 activities: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So there is no concept of regulation in animal life. Whereas in human life, there is a certain way of fulfilling these necessities. Therefore, there is something known as culture. Culture means there is certain rules and regulations in which people function, and certain rules and regulations are considered cultured and some are to be considered uncultured. So more the one becomes educated, one is supposed to be more cultured. On the other hand, the Vedic scriptures, they actually provide us with the right regulated way of living life. In the modern culture, the rules and regulations keep changing. There is no steadiness. But on the other hand, the Shastras provide us with the right kind of understanding of regulation by which we can actually make advancement in the human form of life and not get just succumbed to the basic necessities of life and not make any further advancement. So let us look at this example of eating. So eating in unregulated way. What does it mean and why is it important to regulate or not to regulate? So just like if we go on eating in an unrestricted way, as we know, we all become sick. And Prabhupada, in one of his conversation, someone came and told Prabhupada, people are getting diabetic. Then Prabhupada says, what is this diabetic? It's just overeating. Even they have become old, they want to go on eating. And because they are going on eating, they are not able to, the extra glucose is being accumulated, and therefore they are getting diabetic. So Prabhupada is saying in different places how unhealthy eating habits, and even in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, we see that one of the biggest challenges or the reason for the short span of life is because of unhealthy habits. And so unregulated eating can cause various kinds of diseases, and that is, we can see in this modern world how everyone is afflicted with various kinds of diseases. Similarly, people tend to eat anything and everything. There is no restriction on what is to be eaten, what is not to be eaten. Whatever is made a little tastier by the modern companies, which they know how to increase the taste of certain products. And it doesn't matter whether what kind of food that is. People are trying to eat different kinds of food, and therefore we also see different various kinds of new diseases like cancers and other things, not knowing that some of these foods are also the cause of these kinds of diseases. Similarly, Prabhupada also mentions that how eating without offering to the Lord is also unregulated, is also sinful. And therefore, this real conception of life, of how one should engage one's basic necessities of life, and one does not know, one is implicated by material nature. One does not knowingly or unknowingly is committing certain acts which have very sad consequences. And therefore, this unregulated way of leading life is one of the biggest causes of various problems in the modern age. Similarly, unregulated sleeping, unregulated mating, unregulated defending is the cause of various other problems, anxieties, and struggles in modern human life. So, Shastra, Prabhupada says, means which talks about regulation. And Prabhupada says the word Shastra comes from the root shash, which means ruling or controlling. And Prabhupada gives example of Shasana, government or ruling. Similarly, the word Shastra. So basically, Prabhupada says that the scriptures, the Shastras, are meant to guide us, to provide us with those laws and rules and regulations which are meant to guide us to lead a proper life. And Prabhupada says that one cannot violate the law books, the books of laws. As soon as we violate a law, there is immediately a consequence. So Prabhupada also says that how in the modern society there is a necessity of regulation everywhere. And Prabhupada gives various examples to illustrate this point. Prabhupada says just like there are many wine shops, although it is not good, but because there is some necessity for people who cannot live without it, they need, in order to set up a wine shop, there has to be a license to be taken, or there has to be some permit that needs to be taken, so that there is some sort of regulation, there is some control that the government has. Similarly, we can see even to drive, we need a license. So you can see in every sphere of life, there is some sort of regulation which the government is trying to impose, so that the unregulated way of life can lead to chaos, can lead to turbulence in the society. Similarly, gun control. The idea is that regulation is necessity because humans by themselves, unless they are not truly humans, they are actually animals. And therefore, they do not have the ability to deal with how to regulate or not, how to manage various necessities of life or various things around them. So, with that as the background, that Prabhupada says that sex life is another necessity. Now, in the modern society, this is again very wrongly interpreted and wrongly presented as what are the necessity, what is a sex necessity, just like Madhu Pandit Prabhu was mentioning in the other class, that eating, one needs to do it every day. Sleeping, also one needs sleep every day, otherwise one may not be able to function very well. Similarly, one needs to be defended, in the sense one needs to be in a protective environment to be able to function nicely. Whereas the necessity of mating is not an everyday necessity. But in the modern society, it is so exaggerated that people tend to feel an extra necessity for this necessity of life. And therefore, this misconception of understanding what is sex life and how it is to be seen will be discussed more in this as we go along in this verse. So, one important thing that Prabhupada wonderfully describes in his lecture on this, Prabhupada actually gave a couple of lectures on this verse, and they're all very wonderful lectures. And in those lectures, Prabhupada defines one word that when you use bodily necessity in excessive proportion, that is called kama. It's a very nice definition. So, there are necessities of life when they are duly fulfilled or satisfied, that's all right. But as soon as there is an excessive proportion of fulfilling the bodily necessities, then it is called kama. And as we know how the idea of kama and prema are so different. We are all trying to achieve prema pumarto mahan, and the idea of kama is exactly opposite to that. So, in the bodily necessities of life, the sleeping, eating, sleeping, mating and defending, mating is another important necessity of life. Now, if one exceedingly engages in the idea of sex life, then one's spiritual progress is restricted, one cannot make real advancement. And therefore, it is very important, what are the regulative principles for sex life? How does one engage in a Krishna conscious way? So that is very important. And Prabhupada elaborately explains this word dharma, aviruddha, and so Prabhupada says the word dharma has many different connotations and used in different places as different meanings. So as we see in the very introduction of Bhagavad Gita, the word dharma is referred to as the intrinsic quality of something. And the example that is given of that of fire having heat and light, sugar having sweetness, or water having liquidity. So these are some of the examples that are given to help one understand what is dharma. Similarly, as we see in the other verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, dharmasya hi apavargasya. So there the word dharma is defined as occupational duty. And here, so dharma aviruddha, not against the religious principles. So here Prabhupada is translating dharma as religious principles, or Prabhupada also in other places mentions in his lectures that the laws of God. So here the dharma means the laws of God, and Prabhupada mentions what is this law of God. Law of God means as Krishna spoke in Bhagavad Gita, as it is mentioned in the Vedic scriptures, the Shastras. So Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, so they are meant to help us guide to understand what is dharma. And also we understand what is this dharma. Dharmam hi sakshat bhagavad pranitam. So these laws which are directly given by the Lord, we can understand only when we refer to the books which are given by the Lord himself, the words spoken by the Lord himself, or by the sadhu. Sadhu means who are referring to the Shastra, and Guru, who is also following the Shastra and the Lord. And when we hear from them, only then we understand what is dharma. Otherwise, we cannot understand what is dharma, what is not dharma. And Prabhupada explains the word viruddha. Viruddha means against or not following. And aviruddha means which is not against the principle. So here in this case, which is not against the religious principles. Dharma viruddha means which is against the principles of religious life. And dharma aviruddha means which is not against the principles of religious life. So when one follows religious life, how does one view the idea of engaging in the necessity of sex life? So, and another reason, as we were just briefly discussing before, the idea of kama and prema, as we also see in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that what is the reason which prevents from self-realization. So as we see there, that the lust is the factor which prevents one from self-realization. So unless one does not overcome this urge or this unregulated way of leading, satisfying the basic necessity of sex life, one cannot make advancement in spiritual life. And Prabhupada says that one must understand the rules and regulations as given by the Supreme Lord, the Acharyas and the Sadhu, and from the Shastras, and then one must follow them. If one does not follow them, Prabhupada says that one cannot come to Krishna consciousness, or one cannot make advancement in Krishna consciousness. And one another important point that we can see in this last few verses that we have been seeing is that all these verses are helping us to understand how to become Krishna conscious. What does it mean? So Prabhupada explains by saying that just like if you see smoke, as soon as you see smoke, you understand that there is somewhere fire. Just like somewhere you see heat and light, you can understand that there must be some fire. Or, so Prabhupada explains that just like you see a nature of something, you must also be able to see the source. So when one is intelligent enough, one not only sees the source, but is also able to see the not only the nature of something, but the source behind that. So similarly, Prabhupada says that when we see taste of water, we can see Krishna. We see sunlight, we see different material energies, as it is said, Bhumi Rapanolo Vayu. So Prabhupada says, just like when one sees land, when one thinks, oh, this is the energy of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, then one is actually spiritual. So in this way, when one applies these principles that are being mentioned in these verses in practical life, then Prabhupada says that one can become Krishna conscious 24 hours. And Prabhupada says, just like iron rod, which is put in fire, when it is put in fire for sufficient time, the iron rod no more acts just like an iron rod, but it actually acts like a fire. If one touches the iron rod to anyone, because it's red hot, it just acts like a fire. So similarly, Prabhupada says that one is looking through this vision as provided in this Bhagavad Gita. When one is looking at the world, everything around, one does not see anything material, because one is seeing Krishna behind everything. And one is not separating what he is seeing from Krishna. In the sense, he is able to see that this is the energy of the Lord. And in this way, one can become Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada says that actually when one advances more and more, there is nothing material, but everything is spiritual. And Prabhupada also says, Yat karosi, yat juhosi, yat dadasi, yat ashnasi, yat tapasyasi kurushva tad madarpanam. So Prabhupada says that whatever we are doing, when we offer it to the Lord, then we are doing it the right way. As soon as we are not doing that way, then we are going against the rules of the Lord. We are committing a sinful act. Just like the eating, how do we regulate it? When we offer to the Lord, when it becomes prasadam. So when we offer it to the Lord and then we take, and then becomes prasadam. Similarly, the various activities, when they are not done in the service of the Lord, for the pleasure of the Lord, that becomes enjoying personal enjoyment. And therefore, that is against the regulative principle. Now, here it is important to see that what is the right regulated way of engaging in sex life. So Prabhupada provides this wonderful explanation that in the purport, Prabhupada explains that sex life according to religious principles should be for the propagation of children, not otherwise. So there is a clear definition by the function of the sex life. So what is sex life meant for? So in the modern society, the idea that the sex life is meant for unlimited enjoyment, as it is considered to be the highest material pleasure, people are tending to promote it as the only way to find pleasure, or this is the way to maximize one's pleasure, and unrestrictedly engage in this activity to find happiness and get freedom from distress, whatnot. These are all false conceptions which are propagated in the modern society. But rather, it is said here that actually the one should engage in sex life only for the progeny. And what kind of progeny? Prabhupada explains that one should engage in sex life only to create good population. In fact, Krishna conscious population. And Prabhupada explains how that the purpose of having a putra or son is that the putra is one who helps when the father, when he commits different kinds of sinful activities, he may have to go to a different hellish planet called Pun. And putra is one who helps deliver the father from going to such hellish condition. And therefore, one is supposed to have a son because he frees not only the father but the family from going to a hellish condition. And that should be the quality of a son or a progeny. But however, in the modern conception, there is no idea of what is the reason to have a progeny. There is no conception of having, just because people want to enjoy and the byproduct is the children, they just have children, but do not have any spiritual conception of why there should be progeny and what is it. Also, the progeny is also necessary because Prabhupada says, where will the brahmacharis come from? Brahmachari will come from grihastha, from family people. But the family people must be conscious that they should make their children brahmachari. not that they have any reason and they just go on producing children for no reason. Then Prabhupada says that's like cats and dogs. There is no value of the progeny being any meaningful. Also, Prabhupada says that to have right progeny means they create peace and prosperity in the world. If there is no right progeny, there is no peace and prosperity. As it is as we see in the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, Varna Shankara, when the progeny is not properly conceived, then there is a disturbance in the society. And this is what is happening in modern society, because there is no conception of what is the right kind of progeny. There is disturbance all around. We see children are very disturbing, they don't understand finer aspects of life, they are very whimsical in their life, because there are more fundamental things of samskara which is not being applied, because without applying reformatory process, there is no way to get good results. And therefore, there are 10 kinds of samskaras or reformatory processes which are recommended in the Vedic scriptures. And one of them, Prabhupada says, is the Garbhadana samskara. So, how one should conceive a child, Prabhupada says that also is a great science. And it has to be understood and applied properly. Otherwise, it is said, if a Brahmana does not follow Garbhadana samskara, then the child is Sudra naturally. There is no other question. And Prabhupada says in this Kali Yuga, where are the people who are actually following the principles of Garbhadana samskara? And even more so, Prabhupada says, even if they are following the kind of things that they are following, everyone is a Sudra in the age of Kali. Therefore, where is the question of having a good class of people, Brahmanas, intelligent class of people? There is no purification, there is no purificatory process. And therefore, all kinds of people that are being produced are just Sudras. So, this is a very dangerous system where we do not have any conception about the spiritual value of progeny and sex life. And therefore, Prabhupada says that when actually Garbhadana samskara is done, that all the people, especially the Brahmanas, are invited and they are known. Just like there is ceremony that is performed during marriage ceremony, similarly certain ceremony is performed, and that at a certain time, and that everyone knows that, okay, now I'm going to put a seed, and I'm going to procreate or have a progeny. And by the permission of the Brahmanas and the ceremony, after the ceremony, one engages in the intercourse to have children. So Prabhupada says that the parents are made to become Krishna conscious. And because they are Krishna conscious, the product that they have, the progeny that they have, is also Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada says only when in this way one is engaged in having a progeny, Prabhupada says that, as we saw, Suchinam Srimatam Gehe. So those people who have fallen down from the yogic practices, now in this kind of environment, when there is proper Garbhadana samskara or proper Krishna consciousness, then in that family, the right kind of yogis or the fallen yoga brashtas, they come and take birth. Otherwise, Prabhupada says it's just 4th, 5th class of people who take birth. And there is a problem for the children themselves, the parents themselves, and the society in general. So it is of no help to anyone. So this is very important, that how there is a spiritual perspective, a Krishna conscious perspective everywhere. So if one does not engage, and Prabhupada also gives various instructions about how it is very important for how a mother should deal when she's pregnant. And Prabhupada says there are various rules and regulations which are mentioned about what kind of food one should take, because spicy food or different kind of bitter food can cause different trouble to the soft tissues of the small the living entity. And therefore, Prabhupada says that there are so many rules and regulations. All this must be properly followed. If there is no conception of any of these things, Prabhupada says that there cannot be any proper progeny. And there is, Prabhupada gives the examples of Diti and Kashyapa, and how Diti one day became so agitated by sexual desire that she in the evening forced Kashyapa to have sexual intercourse. And just by that, you can see how two demons, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, took birth. So unless one does not follow the rules and regulations, the consequences are not proper. And same, and here we can see that when even the sex life, which is considered abominable, but when it is followed according to the religious principles as given by the Lord, as mentioned in the Shastras, then even then, when one is following the regulative principles, Prabhupada says, then one can see Krishna, even in this act. And Prabhupada says, if one is able to produce nice Krishna conscious children, one can go on producing endless number of children. There is no problem. But it is important that one must be Krishna conscious. And just like we can see in the life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had many children just to propagate the mission of Krishna consciousness. But again, in another place it is mentioned, the example of Daksha. So Daksha, he gets this boon from the Lord to engage in sexual intercourse unlimitedly. But again in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that one should not, just because one is a devotee, one should not, especially the kind of the devotee Daksha was, his engagement in this boon, his asking for this boon, only led him to commit again another offense at the feet of sage Narada. So the best way is to actually follow the instructions given by the acharyas and lead a life. So unless that regulated kind of life, if we do not lead, then there is unwanted entanglement in the material world. And in the last paragraph, in the last sentence of this purport, Prabhupada also mentions the responsibility of parents is then to make their offspring Krishna conscious. So this is another important point. One is to produce the progeny in the right way, and once the progeny is there, Prabhupada says that one must train them properly. So without proper training, there is no meaning of where will they learn the right principles. And therefore there's a great responsibility of the parents, especially in Krishna consciousness society. Prabhupada always wanted that the parents are always taking care of the children in the right way so that they become Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada always said that these are not ordinary children who are born in Krishna conscious society, and therefore they must be given proper care and attention. And especially as we see in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is also mentioned that the parents, one should not become a father, a teacher, or a guardian, or even a husband, unless one is not able to help the person whom they are the guardian, if they are not able to help one come out of the cycle of birth and death. So it's actually a great responsibility. In the modern society, people are not aware of the responsibility of being a parent. They simply think that they will send them to some school, some daycare, some other place, and they have done their job. No, it is not as simple as that. It is, if one is just doing in that way, then where will they get the right training? In fact, it is said in various verses in Srimad Bhagavatam that the duty of the parents and the government is to make people pious and sinless. So unless that training is not there for them to understand what is sin, what is pious life, what is the right way to act, what is not the right way to act, if it's not properly educated to them, just the modern educational system will not provide them with this necessities to really make progress in their spiritual life. So it is also mentioned that the parents must understand that the problems of life, Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi themselves, and they should also help their children understand these problems of life and help them how they can be trained in a way such that they can come out of the cycle of birth and death. So this is another very important point which Prabhupada is bringing here. The strong man's strength should be applied to protect the weak and not for personal aggression. So this is another idea of anything that is provided by the Lord in the material world, as we see by passion or one's own selfishness, one tries to engage in one's own personal gratification. Someone has more strength, one wants to overpower others and get control and enjoy one's own life. Someone has more name, fame. One tries to promote one's own self and one's own priorities, one's own enjoyment over everything else. But that is not the Vedic civilization. Vedic civilization is very responsible civilization. So here Prabhupada is very wonderfully describing that the strong man's strength should be applied to protect the weak, not for personal aggression. Similarly, the Lord provides us with different abilities, different skills, different capabilities. And they all have to be used in the right way, in the Krishna conscious way. And also keeping in mind, how do we deal with other people? One may be having certain good skill or good ability. That does not mean one can overpower others. In fact, one should use that skill and help others and protect. Here, the strength is meant to protect others, the weak. Similarly, each one of us may have different abilities. They should be used in the right way because it is given by the Lord. And it is not meant for anyone's personal gratification. That is another very important point that to be seen from here. These are some of the points from today's lectures. If there are any questions or comments.
So in the US Supreme Court has banned abortion, right?
Yes.
And the state of Texas has gone against that verdict. So somebody who hears something like this from Bhagavad Gita, maybe one can say that if the marriage is not legal and somebody has an illicit relationship and going for abortion, it's banned, maybe to some extent justified. Let's say a legally married couple, for some reason, if they want to go for abortion. I mean, your viewpoint that you can have only sex life for procreation or for progeny seems to be very difficult for a person who's got a modern liberal outlook. How do you answer that kind of a question?
So Prabhupada does bring this concept of abortion, and Prabhupada says how sinful this is, that how people are killing the children in the womb, and Prabhupada says this is very, very sinful. And Prabhupada says that the modern society is trying to promote a view that there has to be a different kind of contraception or abortion. So Prabhupada says both of them are wrong, both of them are actually sinful. And Prabhupada says that as we see, if we look at this verse 1.2.10 in Srimad Bhagavatam, which says Kamasya Nendindriya Pritir Labho Jiveta Yavata Jivasya Tattva Jagnyasa Nardho Yash Cheha Karma Bhihi. So life desire should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation. Since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth, nothing else should be the goal for one's work. So in connection to this verse, and I think maybe somewhere else also Prabhupada mentions that unless one is not busy in search of the absolute truth, one cannot give up sense gratification. And even Prabhupada mentions that the real contraception is that when one starts following the principles of regulation, the scriptural regulations, then that also becomes easier. So there are many other regulations like the basic regulations of chanting and basic sinful activities. If one prevents them, then this idea that the sex life is for enjoyment, that conception will go when the other principles are followed, the more fundamental principles are followed. If those fundamental principles like chanting, especially in this age, is not followed, then there is no way that people can ever understand what is legally justified and not justified, because the idea of happiness for them is only coming from the pleasure of sex. Unless that does not vanquish, they only have to engage in artificial contraception. But Prabhupada says when the basic principles of Krishna consciousness is driven to them, and they appreciate to some degree or practice it, then they naturally don't have, Prabhupada says religious contraceptive. Prabhupada says by injecting this knowledge and practice, basic practice, then they will restrict by themselves, but otherwise not possible.
So you spoke about prasadam, right? So in Krishna consciousness, we say prasadam you should eat nicely, but there are some ill effect also, like you told that diabetes and some disease because of overeating. Now how do we draw a line? Because many times we get tempted. In ashram, maybe in temple, we see some devotees there, so we have some fear. But if we go out of the border, then we attack like anything, saying nobody is there. So how do we draw a line in that concept?
So Prabhupada gave various instructions, as generally devotees are aware, that in the beginning Prabhupada encouraged devotees to have prasadam, but at the same time, as one progresses, so basically there is different stages of devotion and there are different stages of devotees. So as one advances in devotional life, one has to reduce the basic necessities of life. So one of the symptoms of advancement is the reduction of other aspects of necessities of life. So it is a self-regulation after one becomes devotee. Beyond a point, no one can force anyone, but it's a conscious by regularly reading more of Prabhupada's instructions on the guidelines, like Prabhupada says, eat 50% of the stomach, have 25% water, or different instructions Prabhupada has given in terms of even how to lead a healthy food lifestyle. So taking a look at all of them and based upon the level where we are and trying to apply those principles. And regarding when we go out or we are inside, one should still restrain oneself, because at the end of the day, we are risking our consciousness. We do not know how a small chain of incident can complicate one's life. Just like Sadhana Prabhu explains the example of the person sitting in the car, in the train. When they see some family sees that there is some space, the father goes, then the wife comes, then the children come, and they immediately push the other person who is there. So little inattentiveness can cause havoc. And Prabhupada also mentions in the purport to another verse, or maybe in the lecture, that sometimes there can be a mistake or a certain habit which one is not able to overcome. But that should not, one should come back. There is a possibility that someone accidentally did something or ate something more or did something which is they're not supposed to eat, or went outside and eat something. In the beginning, at least when one is getting trained to become an advanced devotee, one must regret and understand, oh, I should not have done this, and come back and make more better resolution to how do I prevent, and also repent and let Prabhupada and God Nitai know that, oh, maybe I should not have done this, and seek more strength and guidance so that one does not do it again. Does that help?
Prabhu, the stomach seems to expand based upon how much ever we eat. So how to know when to stop? Because it's actually it can accommodate how much ever. And some people don't get diabetes also. So if there is diabetes, that means you know that you've eaten more, so you can stop. But what if you don't get diabetes? Then you go on eating, then suddenly one day heart attack comes. So at what is the early warning or something like that that can help us tell that I'm eating more?
Probably doing more kirtan will reduce everything else.
I have an answer for that. So basically, in Krishna consciousness, one of the drawbacks that we have is this yukta vairagya. Anything that you want, you can dovetail it. Prabhupada has given a formula. There is a very fine understanding of that Yukta Vairagya has to be applied in our life, otherwise it becomes sense gratification. Because in the name of Yukta Vairagya, whatever you want you can use or you can consume and say that I am doing it for Krishna. So the point where it has to be drawn, is it going to please Prabhupada or Krishna, or is it meant for pleasing my senses? You get the answer, you will draw the line. That's
So here, this verse, we are also seeing, right, once we have the sex life, right, the human life, once we have the children, there is some kind of an attachment, right, natural attachment. But here we are also saying, like, the Supreme Lord is saying, like, he's devoid of passion and desire, and there is an attachment here. So how to overcome that, and what is the inference that we get from the Shastras?
So as we see in Srimad Bhagavatam, that there are different ways people can develop detachment, but none of them really last. So the way to develop detachment is by rendering Bhakti Yoga. Is by rendering Bhakti Yoga, the byproduct of that is knowledge and detachment. So the positive way is the more we engage in devotional service, naturally the all other unwanted things like unwanted attachments to different things will vanquish naturally. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayati Asu Vairagnam Jnanam Chayad Ahetuko. Bhakti Yoga is a very wonderful process. So because we associate with the Supreme Lord, all good qualities that are required will come. The modes of passion, the modes of here as we see the attachment, which are emerging all from modes of passion and ignorance. Actually, the different unwanted qualities that emerge are because of the lower modes. So in order to transcend the modes, we need the association of the Supreme Lord. The more we associate, the more we engage in the service of the Lord, naturally the purification will happen. Otherwise, there is no way for purification. Especially in this age, it's even more difficult in the environment that we live. The more we engage in devotional service in the association of devotees, we can overcome these lower modes and the other kinds of attachments that we have. Actually, every day, or at least, I'll just share one example. So when I used to go to ISKCON Bangalore, we used to go on Sundays. So Sunday there used to be a special program. But the devotees used to do service whole day. But in the beginning, there was a fear, oh, what will happen to my studies? What will happen to something else? If I spend the whole day here, there is something that I'm going to lose somewhere. So that attachment to different things we hold. But gradually when we start doing service, somewhere or other, if you start doing, we will see, oh, actually there's no big loss. It's just my thought that, I'm losing this, I'm losing that. But as one gradually does service, one says, oh, there's no need to fear. This is only good. And by doing service, one can see, if one even chanting and doing some devotional service, one can see that so many conceptions that we have attached in the material world outside which are important, without which things will not move. But actually when we start devotional service, we see actually none of those things, they are all anarthas. They are not really required. We are simply unnecessarily being anxious about so many things. And that detachment, as we do devotional service, it will naturally we can see, yes, it's okay. If there are no questions or comments, we'll stop here. Granthra Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna.